When the lights of classical antiquity flickered and died across Western Europe in the 5th century, casting half a continent into political fragmentation, the Roman dream did not perish. Instead, it shifted its gaze eastward, retreating behind the impregnable walls of a new capital to endure for another 1,000 years. This was the Eastern Roman Empire, an entity that would come to be known by modern scholars as the Byzantine Empire. It stood as a solitary beacon of centralized civilization against relentless tides of barbarian incursions, preserving the flame of antiquity while forging an entirely new destiny. The anchor of this monumental survival was Constantinople, positioned masterfully at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. The city was a geographic masterpiece, bounded by water on 3 sides and fortified by the legendary Theodosian walls on the 4th. This strategic placement made it the wealthiest metropolis in the medieval world, a vital hub for global trade that funneled the riches of the Silk Road directly into the imperial treasury. Constantinople was not merely a capital, it was a fortress designed to withstand the end of the world. Within these walls flourished a unique blend of Roman administrative genius, Greek intellectual heritage, and fervent Christian faith. This cultural synthesis provided the ideological glue that bound diverse populations across 3 continents into a cohesive, enduring state. The ambition to reclaim the glory of a unified Mediterranean world found its greatest champion in the 6th century under the Emperor Justinian I. His vision was absolute, driven by an unwavering belief in the divine right of the emperor to rule over a singular Orthodox Christian domain. Justinian I unleashed the imperial legions to reconquer lost western territories, sweeping through North Africa and the Italian peninsula. Yet his most enduring triumph was not forged on the battlefield, but in the codification of Roman law. The Corpus Juris Civilis distilled centuries of chaotic legal precedent into a coherent framework, forming the bedrock of modern Western jurisprudence. The echoes of his foundational legal reforms still resonate through the courtrooms of the modern era. But the weight of carrying such a colossal legacy extracted a devastating human toll. The mid-6th century brought an unforeseen horror in the form of the Justinianic plague, a catastrophic pandemic that decimated the population and shattered the economic foundations of the state. Citizens watched helplessly as invisible death swept through the bustling streets of Constantinople, leaving a traumatized society to grapple with the sudden fragility of their golden age. The psychological scars of this decimation fundamentally altered the empire's trajectory, replacing boundless expansion with a grim determination to merely survive. This vulnerability was swiftly exploited by external adversaries, plunging the state into a grueling, decades-long conflict with the Sassanid Persian Empire. The 2 superpowers engaged in a mutually destructive war of attrition that exhausted their treasuries and bled their armies dry. While the Byzantines ultimately emerged victorious, the triumph was Pyrrhic. The geopolitical landscape of the Near East had been irreversibly fractured, leaving a power vacuum that would soon be filled by a force neither empire had anticipated. Bursting from the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, the armies of a newly unified Islamic caliphate swept across the exhausted empires of antiquity. The Byzantine territories of Syria, Egypt, and North Africa fell with shocking rapidity, stripping the state of its most prosperous agricultural provinces. This sudden epochal shift reduced the once sprawling superpower to a beleaguered realm confined largely to Anatolia and the Balkans. The shadow of total annihilation loomed as Arab forces pushed relentlessly toward the imperial capital itself. The defining crisis arrived in the late 7th and early 8th centuries, with massive Arab sieges of Constantinople. The city was completely encircled by land and sea, its defenders vastly outnumbered and staring into the abyss of historical erasure. If the capital fell, the gateway to Eastern Europe would be thrown wide open, potentially altering the religious and cultural destiny of the entire continent. It was in this desperate crucible that a miraculous technological innovation changed the course of human history. To break the naval blockade, the defenders unleashed Greek fire, a highly classified, devastating incendiary weapon whose precise chemical composition remains a mystery to this day. Ejected from bronze siphons mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships, this liquid fire ignited upon contact with water, burning fiercely and clinging to enemy vessels and flesh alike. The psychological terror it inflicted was absolute, turning the surrounding sea into a blazing inferno that consumed the invading fleets. The deployment of Greek fire was a masterclass in strategic statecraft, tightly controlled by the imperial court as a divine secret granted only to the chosen empire. It was not merely a tactical tool, but a geopolitical deterrent that kept hostile navies at bay for centuries. The searing flames of this terrifying invention bought the empire precious time to reorganize, adapt, and construct a new paradigm of defense for a vastly diminished realm. Forced to abandon the sprawling professional standing armies of late antiquity, the state implemented a revolutionary administrative overhaul known as the theme system. The remaining territories were divided into military districts called themes, where soldiers were granted plots of land in exchange for hereditary military service. This localized defense strategy bypassed the need for a massive central treasury, ensuring that invading armies faced fiercely motivated local militias fighting for their own homes and harvests. Complementing this military localization was a highly sophisticated, centralized bureaucracy operating from the capital. A complex hierarchy of civil servants managed taxation, diplomacy, and logistics with a precision unmatched in the medieval world. This administrative machinery allowed the emperor to rapidly mobilize resources, coordinate intelligence, and maintain a functional state apparatus even when enemy forces ravaged the provinces. The empire survived not just by the sword, but by the relentless efficiency of the pen. When military force proved insufficient, the imperial court turned to the subtle arts of diplomacy and cultural influence. The Byzantines weaponized prestige, enveloping foreign envoys in awe-inspiring ceremonies, dazzling them with gold, silk, and mechanical wonders designed to project overwhelming power. Through a calculated web of strategic marriages, bribery, and shifting alliances, they continuously played their enemies against one another, neutralizing threats before they could cross the frontier. This soft power projection culminated in the monumental conversion of the Slavic peoples to Orthodox Christianity. By dispatching missionaries who developed a written alphabet for the Slavic languages, the empire drew vast northern populations into its cultural orbit. This spiritual diplomacy created a sprawling Byzantine commonwealth, securing a loyal buffer zone that extended the empire's ideological reach far beyond its physical borders. Through these multifaceted survival strategies, the empire not only endured its darkest centuries but eventually engineered a spectacular resurgence known as the Macedonian Renaissance. Spanning the 9th to the 11th centuries, this era saw the reconquest of lost territories, a flourishing of arts and literature, and a revitalization of imperial authority. The climax of this golden age was realized under Basil II, a ruthless and brilliant tactician who stabilized the frontiers and filled the imperial treasury to bursting. By the early 11th century, the borders stretched from the rugged mountains of Armenia to the sun-drenched shores of southern Italy. The state was once again the undisputed hegemon of the eastern Mediterranean, radiating power and cultural brilliance across a fragmented world. Yet this medieval zenith was inherently fragile, reliant on the extraordinary competence of individual emperors and the continued loyalty of a powerful, land-owning military aristocracy. The illusion of invulnerability was shattered in 1071 at the Battle of Manzikert. A disastrous defeat at the hands of the Seljuk Turks resulted in the capture of the emperor and the catastrophic loss of Anatolia, the empire's vital agricultural and military heartland. This singular catastrophe triggered a cascading collapse of the frontier defenses, plunging the state into a desperate struggle for survival that forced them to seek military aid from the very Western powers they had long viewed with deep suspicion. The resulting crusades, initially intended to push back the encroaching Turkish forces, ultimately delivered a fatal betrayal. In 1204, the armies of the Fourth Crusade, driven by greed and political manipulation, turned their weapons against their fellow Christians and sacked Constantinople. The impregnable city was breached not by foreign infidels, but by Western knights who systematically looted centuries of accumulated wealth, burned priceless manuscripts, and shattered the continuity of the state. The trauma of the 1204 sack left a permanent scar on the collective psyche of the Eastern Orthodox world, severing the last threads of trust between the East and the West. Citizens who had viewed their city as the eternal, divinely protected center of the universe were forced into exile, forming splinter states in the provinces. The psychological devastation of seeing the Queen of Cities desecrated fundamentally broke the imperial spirit, transforming a universal empire into a traumatized, fractured regional power. Although the capital was eventually recaptured in 1161, the Palaiologan restoration was a hollow victory in a rapidly shrinking world. The restored state was a shadow of its former self, crippled by crushing debt, relentless civil wars, and a drastically reduced population. The geopolitical center of gravity had shifted decisively, leaving the once mighty empire as merely a pawn in the broader struggles of ascending maritime republics and rising Islamic sultanates. As the 14th century bled into the 15th, the inexorable rise of the Ottoman Empire tightened a suffocating noose around the remaining Byzantine territories. The Ottoman war machine, fueled by innovative military tactics, gunpowder weaponry, and an endless stream of recruits, systematically absorbed the surrounding lands. Constantinople was transformed into an isolated, impoverished enclave, a dying island in a vast Ottoman sea, desperately appealing to an indifferent West for salvation that would never arrive. The final act of this millennial drama unfolded in the spring of 140-53. Sultan Mehmed II unleashed a massive bombardment against the legendary Theodosian walls, utilizing colossal bronze cannons that shattered the ancient masonry. After a grueling 53-day siege, the city finally fell, and the last Roman emperor died fighting in the breach. The collapse of Constantinople extinguished the political entity of the Eastern Roman Empire forever, marking a definitive end to the Middle Ages. Yet in its death throes, the empire seeded the intellectual rebirth of Western Europe. As the Ottoman threat intensified, waves of Byzantine scholars fled westward to Italy, carrying with them priceless manuscripts of ancient Greek philosophy, literature, and science that had been preserved for over a millennium. This intellectual exodus provided a crucial catalyst for the Renaissance, fundamentally altering the trajectory of Western civilization and ensuring that the cultural DNA of the empire would survive its political destruction. The Byzantine Empire's enduring legacy is far more than a mere epilogue to the glory of Rome. Through a unique blend of strategic geographical positioning, terrifying technological innovations, and masterful diplomatic maneuvering, it stood as the shield of Europe for 1,000 years. It preserved the light of classical antiquity through the darkest centuries of human history, leaving an indelible mark that forever shaped the religious, cultural, and political landscapes of the modern world.